remember the exact moment I realized I wasn't invited. It was a Tuesday morning. The kind of morning where the sunlight feels soft and innocent. And yet something inside you knows your life is about to shift forever. My phone buzzed with a message from my brother. Samir, I expected the usual mundane texts, maybe a joke, a question about work, or a random photo he'd snapped. Instead, it was short, brutal, and unforgettable. My wife doesn't want you there. 4 words. Just 4 words that split the world in half for me. The world I knew. The world where I believed my brother loved me, trusted me, wanted me by his side through life's milestones. Gone, shattered, buried beneath those 4 words. I stared at the message for what felt like hours. The glow of my phone illuminating the hollow inside me. My hands trembled not from anger, not from fear, but from a grief I didn't even know I was allowed to feel. The grief of being invisible in the life of someone I had loved without question. Someone I had trusted with pieces of my soul I'd never given anyone else. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat was tight. My chest heavy. Even the simple act of breathing felt like betrayal against my own sorrow. And in that silence, a storm began to stir before I could fully process. I scrolled through social media to see the invitations. The glowing pictures of my brother's friends, their families. The laughter and the joy I was meant to be part of, yet was excluded from. His fiancée, Noor, had drawn the invisible line, and I had been firmly placed on the wrong side. I remember sinking to the floor, hugging my knees, and letting the tears fall. Not in anger, but in a quiet, suffocating heartbreak. My parents had passed away years ago, leaving Samir as the closest thing I had to family. And now even that had been taken from me. Not by fate, not by accident, but deliberately. My own blood, my brother, had let someone else decide I was unwanted. For the first time in my life, I understood the cruelty of being invisible to someone who should have cherished you. And worse, I realized the silent truth. I had been the one to always bend, to always compromise, to always forgive. Yet, when it mattered, my worth had been measured and deemed insufficient. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my small balcony, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the city lights and the faint stars above. I whispered to myself questions that had no answers. Why me? Why now? What had I done to deserve this erasure? And slowly, the tears gave way to a burning sense of awareness. I couldn't change his mind. I couldn't make Noor see me. But what I could change, what I could reclaim was myself. A few days passed, and the sting of exclusion transformed into a quiet, simmering observation. I began replaying every interaction with Samir over the past months, years even. Every phone call, every family dinner. Every time he had hesitated before making a decision I assumed was mutual. Every smile. Every gesture of affection now tinged with the realization that my place in his life had never been guaranteed, only assumed. Noor had always been clever. She had a way of infiltrating hearts without anyone noticing, of planting seeds of doubt, of shaping the narrative in her favor. And I had been silent. Always polite, always accommodating, always careful not to challenge her. Until now, I didn't confront Samir, not yet. Instead, I watched. I observed. I let the anger simmer beneath the surface, quiet, contained, calculated. My grief became a shield, my silence a weapon. I had been excluded from a wedding, but I refused to be erased from my own life. Days turned into a week. Invitations were delivered to friends and distant relatives. Pictures of dresses, decor, rehearsals. All glowing on social media like a celebration in a world where I no longer existed. And every time my phone lit up with notifications, I flinched, unsure if it was news of the wedding or just another reminder that I wasn't wanted. But in the midst of that storm, something remarkable happened. I began to see myself through new eyes. The woman who had bent and broken herself to fit expectations. The woman who had whispered apologies for existing too loudly, too proudly, too openly. She was gone. Replaced by someone quieter, sharper, and deeply aware. I began to write. Not poetry. Not letters. not messages meant for anyone else. I wrote for myself. I wrote every hurt, every moment of silent suffering, every realization that had lain dormant for years. And as I wrote, I began to untangle the grief from the anger, the sorrow from the shame, and the love I had misplaced from the boundaries I deserved. And in that quiet writing, I began to plan not revenge in the way most would understand it, not destruction, but a reclamation. A subtle, poetic justice that would require patience, self-worth, and resilience. I would not crash into Samir's world with fury. I would rise and mind out it wasn't immediate. Change never is. I began small. I invested in myself in ways I had delayed for too long. I reconnected with old friends who had drifted away, afraid of my sadness, afraid of my dependence. I enrolled in courses I had wanted to explore for years: painting, writing, even public speaking. Every small step was a quiet declaration. I am still here. I still matter. Samir called one evening. I didn't answer. He left a message, short and hesitant. "Are you okay?" My heart clenched. I had loved him deeply, and part of me still wished for the warmth of brotherly love. But I didn't reply. I wouldn't. Not yet. Because healing required distance, observation, and clarity. Noor sent flowers. Simple bouquets with tiny notes of condolence for my absence, carefully crafted to appear generous and innocent. I placed the flowers on my desk, untouched. I didn't respond. I observed. I watched her actions, her smile in photos, her gestures at the wedding, all meticulously curated to control perception. And the more I watched, the more I realized that her power over Samir was as much about his willingness as her cunning. And I knew, silently, that she underestimated me. She assumed I would crumble, I would beg, I would vanish into the shadows of resentment and hurt. But the truth was, I was building myself. Quietly, deliberately, in ways that no one could control. One night, weeks before the wedding, I sat alone in my room, the soft hum of the city around me, and I wrote a letter I would never send. Samir, you left me out. You let her decide my worth. But I'm still here. I am stronger than I was when you thought I needed your approval. And when you see me next, you will see the woman I became without your permission. You will see strength. You will see peace. You will see me. Tears streamed down my face as I folded the paper, knowing I would never deliver it. The power of that act wasn't in confrontation, but in self-recognition. I was reclaiming my story, my narrative, my life. And that night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. Truly slept. Not because I had forgiven, not because the hurt had disappeared, but because I had found the first flicker of control over my own world. That flicker grew. Every decision I made, every new venture I began, every time I chose myself over silence, it grew brighter. I realized revenge wasn't in destruction, nor in proving someone wrong. It was in transformation, in showing up fully, alive, and unapologetic ally. And deep down, I sensed that one day, Samir and even Noor would realize what they had done. Not through my words, not through confrontation, but through quiet observation, through the undeniable strength of a woman who was once invisible and now uncontainable. Weeks passed, and the wedding approached like a storm on the horizon, inescapable, relentless, and suffocating. I heard whispers through mutual friends, glimpses of conversations, little hints of the excitement, the planning, the joy I was never meant to touch. My brother's laughter, which had always been a balm to my restless nights, now felt like a taunt, a reminder of my exclusion. I could have reached out. I could have called, texted, begged for some semblance of acknowledgement. But I didn't. There was a clarity in my silence that was unfamiliar to me. A fierce awareness that I was no longer the person who would bend for acceptance, who would shrink herself to fit someone else's comfort. I started spending more time in quiet reflection, walking through the park near my apartment, letting the cool air fill the hollows inside me. I watched couples pass, friends laughing, families holding hands. Each sight carved a little space in me. A reminder of what I had lost, but also what I could still claim for myself. I began reconnecting with my passions, the ones I had buried under years of compromise and expectation. Painting first, long afternoons with brushes and colors, letting each stroke express the emotions I couldn't put into words. Then writing letters I'd never send, notes that became chapters of my own story. Every creation was a quiet defiance, a reclaiming of my presence in a world that had tried to erase me. And yet, the hurt lingered. I felt it in unexpected ways when I opened the door to a delivery and remembered he wouldn't be there to greet me with a smile. When a mutual friend mentioned a detail of the ceremony I would never witness. When I passed by the hall where the reception would be, and imagined their laughter spilling out into the night. A sound I would never hear, but something shifted inside me, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Where there had once been only grief, there was now a determination, quiet but unyielding. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to a wedding invitation or to anyone else's approval. I could not control their choices, their desires, or their decisions. But I could control myself, how I responded, how I healed, how I grew, and so I made a choice. I would not be a shadow watching life pass me by. I would live fully, unapologetically. Without waiting for permission or validation. The day of the wedding arrived. Though I was not there, I followed the updates from a distance, friends sending pictures, videos, snippets of the ceremony. I saw him in a tailored suit, his smile directed toward her, his happiness palpable. And yes, a pang of longing hit me on I refused to suppress. Not for him, not for the wedding, but for the bond that had been lost. For the familial love that had been overshadowed by someone else's control. I noticed something subtle, almost imperceptible. In the photos, he looked uneasy at times, a hesitation in his smile, a flicker in his eyes. Not outwardly, not in a way anyone else could notice. But it was there if you looked closely. Regret. Tiny moments of realizing what exclusion had cost him. What his silence and compliance with Noor had meant to someone who had loved him unconditionally. I did not gloat. I did not revel. I only observed. The universe has a way of teaching lessons without interference. And I had learned mine already. Strength is not in revenge, it is in resilience. Peace is not in retaliation, it is in self-possession. After the wedding, I received a call from a mutual friend. She asked about you, they said, Noor. She wanted to know how you are. I didn't answer immediately. There was no rush, no obligation. I let the words settle. That fleeting curiosity, that need to check in on me, revealed a truth I had already discovered. Absence speaks louder than presence. When someone chooses to exclude you, it leaves a mark, a hollow they cannot fill. And I had filled mine with something far greater. Myself. Days turned into weeks. And I noticed how my absence began to ripple in unexpected ways. Samir, once so certain of his choices, now seemed to navigate a subtle discomfort in his own life. Friends mentioned offhand remarks, small regrets he had shared about missed moments with me. Conversations about family bonds he had underestimated. I did not celebrate these revelations, nor did I confront him. They were mine to witness, silent truths that required no amplification. I focused instead on building. My art gained attention, people recognizing the depth and authenticity in my work. My writing, once private, found its audience through a small blog I started, and readers connected with my vulnerability and honesty. Each message, each comment, each acknowledgement of my voice was a quiet affirmation. I mattered. Independently of anyone else's recognition, I also began nurturing relationships I had neglected. Old friends, mentors, colleagues, they were no longer peripheral in my life. They became my anchors, reminding me that love and support exist in abundance when we allow ourselves to be seen fully. And in seeing myself fully, I understood that the pain I had carried, the exclusion I had endured, was not a measure of my worth. It was a reflection of someone else's limitations. I answered, "Are you okay?" he asked, the words tentative, layered with uncertainty and something else. Apprehension. I replied, my voice calm, steady, grounded. I've been okay for a while. There was a pause. A silence filled with the weight of everything left unsaid, all the moments I had missed. All the laughter, all the shared memories that had been overshadowed by exclusion. I didn't realize, he said finally, voice small. I thought it would be easier for you if. I don't need explanations, I interrupted gently. I need respect and I need my own life. And I have both now and in that quiet moment. I realized something crucial. The true subtlety of revenge is not in anger, not in confrontation, not in forcing regret. It is in being so complete in yourself that the absence, the hurt, the exclusion becomes irrelevant to your happiness. I thought of Noor of the wedding, of the invisible line drawn between my life and theirs. And I understood with clarity her attempt to diminish me had failed not because she was flawed, but because I was stronger than she could have anticipated. The quiet, consistent work of self-discovery, of reclaiming my voice and my identity, had become my subtle revenge. No shouting, no dramatic confrontations, just presence, just authenticity, just life lived fully, beautifully, without seeking permission. And somewhere deep inside, I felt a gentle satisfaction, not of triumph over them, but of triumph over the old version of myself, one who sought approval, who doubted her worth, allowed others to dictate her place in the world. That woman was gone. Time passed, as it always does, but it carried me forward, not backward. The wedding faded into memory, a ripple in the vast ocean of my life. And yet its shadow lingered long enough for me to understand what had truly happened. Exclusion had forced me to confront who I was when no one else was looking. And I liked who I found. My mornings became rituals of self-affirmation. I painted with abandon, my brushes moving across canvases that once were blank with uncertainty. Colors spilled, uncontained, reflecting the emotions I had buried for years: grief, anger, sorrow. And finally, the quiet brilliance of awakening. My writings, shared online, began to connect with people I had never met. Readers who felt my heartbreak and my growth, who saw themselves in my reflections. Each comment, each heartfelt message became a mirror of the resilience I had cultivated silently. I saw Samir only rarely, through mutual friends or fleeting social media glimpses. Each time, I noticed subtleties, the way his eyes lingered longer than casual when he saw me, the hesitation in his words when recounting family moments, the unspoken acknowledgement of my absence at events. I didn't confront him. I didn't need to. My presence, my thriving, unshakable presence, was a statement louder than any argument or accusation could ever be. Then, one evening, a mutual friend invited me to a small gathering, a celebration of a professional achievement of mine. It was intimate, warm, and full of people who had come to see me as I truly was, not as anyone else had defined me. I arrived, and across the room, I saw him, Samir. He approached cautiously, hesitant, unsure if he should speak. I felt no anger, no resentment, only calm, only recognition of what had been and what had changed. You've grown, he said finally, his voice soft, a mixture of admiration and something heavier, something like regret. I replied, smiling gently. And I am still growing, he nodded, perhaps realizing fully for the first time the cost of excluding me. The subtle impact of choosing someone else's preferences over the bond of family. I didn't need him to apologize. I didn't need him to explain. What mattered was that I had become visible in a way he could no longer ignore. Not because of his recognition, but because I no longer depended on it. Nor appeared briefly, smiling politely, her charm carefully measured. I met her gaze, soft but unwavering. I could sense the tension, the recognition that the quiet woman she had underestimated had become impossible to diminish. She realized, even without words, that power is not in exclusion, but in self-possession. That the woman she tried to erase had flourished in ways she could not control. It was then I understood the final piece of my silent, poetic revenge: presence without permission, success without sabotage, peace without confrontation. My life had become its own assertion, a living declaration that no one else could determine my worth. No one else could control my happiness, and no one else could define my story. I continued to cultivate my world with intention. I traveled to small towns I had always wanted to explore, immersing myself in art, culture, and experiences that had once felt distant. I hosted workshops, spoke to groups of women, sharing my story not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that absence, exclusion, and betrayal do not define us unless we allow them to. And in those moments, I realized something profound. The true power of growth lies not in proving someone wrong, but in proving yourself right. In choosing yourself, your peace, your joy, your unshakable presence. One afternoon, months later, Samir reached out directly. Not with an apology, not with an invitation, but with a quiet acknowledgement. "I've missed having you in my life," he said. I didn't realize how much. I see now. I listened. I allowed him to speak. And then I said what I had been waiting to say, not as reproach, but as affirmation. I am here. I have always been here. And I will continue to be, for myself first, for no one else. The pause that followed was significant. He understood, fully, that his choices had consequences, not ones I had to mete out, but ones he had to live with. Regret, subtle but undeniable, was etched into his tone, and I felt a profound peace. Not because I had taught him a lesson, but because I had taught myself one. That night, I sat by my window, a candle flickering beside me, a half-finished painting waiting patiently on my desk. And I whispered to the woman I had become, "You are enough. You are whole. You are free." I thought of the wedding one last time, not with bitterness, not with longing, not with pain, but with clarity. That day, I had been invisible in someone else's narrative, and it had hurt. But invisibility had forced me to find visibility within myself. Exclusion had driven me to discover my voice. Betrayal had awakened my strength. I had become the woman I was always meant to be: present, empowered, unyielding, and free. My story no longer depended on the recognition of others. It thrived in my own understanding, in the beauty of my choices, in the quiet yet undeniable assertion of my life, and in that peace. I smiled, knowing that the true victory was not in their regret, not in their acknowledgement, not in any external validation. The victory was mine, internal, profound, unshakable. I was no longer invisible. I was whole. I was luminous. I was free.